The definition of ability: a talent, skill, or proficiency in a particular area. Account her ability. The journey to success is never easy. These women come to share their story to inspire, motivate, and encourage you to focus, believe, and tap into your God given abilities, and you too will succeed. Welcome to the Account Her Ability show, hosted by Trey Kearney.
Y'all are not ready for this woman right here. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about her. She is Dorinda Walker. Having earned the reputation of being a change agent and visionary, Walker is a multi-award winning marketer and founder and CEO of Cultural Solutions Group. In sharing her personal journey to success, she has also earned the reputation of being a motivating empowerment speaker, deemed an inspirational warrior and champion of change, earning numerous honors and recognition for leadership, impact, community advocacy, and empowering women and diverse communities. She is unapologetic about using her voice and platform to advocate for underserved populations. Walker is committed to raising awareness and driving solutions for social issues driven by racial, gender, and financial inequity. Protected by Purpose is Walker's debut book. It reveals her painful childhood experiences, triumphs, and the life lessons that led her to embrace the journey from broken pieces to owning her power as an empowered woman. She tackles issues that many live with today, from being born into a dysfunctional family, addiction, mental illness, living with HIV/AIDS, domestic violence, and overcoming low self-esteem. Walker gives affirmations and shares the lessons she's learned to help others overcome similar issues. Walker offers readers a deep understanding of how to turn tragedies into triumph with love, faith, and forgiveness. Her book inspires readers to know that they can empower themselves to not only survive, but to go on to achieve success beyond their wildest dreams with a distinct purpose. Welcome to our Wonder Woman, Dorinda Walker. Welcome, Dorinda.
Thank you, Trey. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so excited about this because I read your story and I am your story. And so many of us are your story. So many young girls from the hood, from the inner city, we are your story. And a lot of us don't make it out because we don't have you in our lives. We didn't have the book Protected by Purpose when we were coming up. So I wanted to share you with the world because your story is that of a miracle, I should say, because you shouldn't be dead, but you should be dead. But God had a purpose, and that's why I know you have the book Protected by Purpose. So with all of my guests, the first thing I do is I ask them to share their journey about their mother and their father. So tell us a little bit about your mom and dad, Weezy and Bubba, because you know I know them. I feel like I know them personally from the book. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with your mom and your dad.
So we had a very loving relationship. Both of my parents were the kindest people you would ever meet, loved by everyone who knew them. My dad was a quiet, shy guy. I looked just like him, by the way. He always had a grin on his face, but would give you the shirt off his back. And my mother was the same way, but my mother was a little firecracker.
Okay. That's
She was very outgoing. Yeah. They met in high school. My dad had aspirations to be an NBA player. He was very athletic, all-star athlete, excelled at all sports. My mom had a beautiful falsetto voice. She wanted to be a singer. They fell in love at first sight, from what I understand, at a basement party in East Orange.
Oh.
And at my mother's best friend's house. And it was, they were inseparable from there. My mom had me her senior year, but during that time, my dad had got benched on the team, and he decided to cope with his disappointment by using heroin, and introduced my mom to heroin, and they became addicted. And, their life changed forever because of their addiction. All of those hopes and dreams that they had were pushed to the side because they were living to get high.
Wow.
And I suffered the consequences of those decisions that they made. And, there was times I was told, because I don't remember, that I was, shuffled from relative to relative, grandparent to grandparent, because they had disappeared. My grandfather would have to go to New York and find my father, and they were shooting needles, in the 70s, and heroin was like all over New York and New Jersey in the 70s. And, as they became more functional with their addiction, my dad worked odd and end jobs. My mom had a good profession as a legal secretary and then paralegal. And my dad ended up going to jail for murder.
Oh.
Got into an altercation over $10 over something stupid. And but the guy punched my dad in the face with some brass knuckles. And if you knew my cousins and my father's side of the family, that was unacceptable. So
brass
yeah,
knuckles, girl, you just took me all the way back. These young kids probably don't know what brass knuckles are. So anybody who's listening who don't know what brass knuckles is, it's like a 4-finger ring and it's brass. Wow, I haven't thought about brass knuckles since. Whoa.
And I'll never forget it because I remember when my dad came home after his jaw was all wired, he looked like the Elephant Man.
Wow.
And my dad was a beautiful man, very handsome man. And I remember him coming home with his gun, and there was, some arguing going on, and I got, scooped out of bed and brought to my aunt's house. And I remember the day. I didn't know what was going on other than, somebody had hit my dad, and the family was outraged about it. But he said it was the biggest regret of his life because he didn't mean to kill the man. His intent was to shoot him in the leg. And he said when the gun ricocheted, it hit him in the chest and the man died. He lived with that regret his whole life. He actually thought that God was punishing him because of that. With him suffering from AIDS and everything that he had to deal with in his life. He died very young, 35.
Wow.
My mom ended up in an abusive relationship with the man she met in rehab. She broke the number one rule and started dating a man in the rehab facility. I have to say, he was by all looks and appearances, super fine. I remember walking down the street with him and women would whistle at him. Very attractive man, but he was the devil. And so he physically and mentally abused both of us. Told my mother that he hated me because she loved, me more than him. And yeah, he just had all kind of issues.
Wow.
And by the time I was freed from the abuse, so I went from straight A, honor roll student, gifted and talented, to dysfunctional, super depressed, no self-esteem, no self-worth. By the time I was freed from the abuse, when my dad came home from prison, I remember the happiest time of my life, 8th grade. I transferred from Hart Middle School in East Orange to VLD. Had so much going on, looking forward to a new chapter in my life with my dad. And then less than a year later, he got diagnosed with AIDS. And it was devastating because all we knew about AIDS in the 80s was that people were dying.
Yes.
And, it was kind of a shame. There was a shame attached to it,
yes.
And and that was the beginning of my real downfall because I had just got my dad back, and then he was going to go.
Wow.
And so I ended up dropping out of high school because I realized that heroin was the only thing keeping him alive, because he said it's the only thing that subsided the pain. And I remember him telling me I hurt all over.
Wow.
And so back then I was doing nothing but dating drug dealers, and I actually got into a relationship with a really big time drug dealer. And I was just off the chain. When my dad died, it was devastating. And then my mom disappeared right after the funeral. And so I assumed she was dead because it was not like her, because I supplied her heroin too. And we were close. So for me not to hear from her.
Right there for 1 second.
Yes.
You said you supplied her heroin too.
Mm-hmm.
So you supplied your dad and your mom with heroin.
Yes.
Why?
For my dad, in my mind, I was helping him because he tried to withdraw from it and I was there, and I remember him being so sick and in so much pain, and I didn't want him to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew he had AIDS, so if heroin was going to keep him okay, then I was okay with it. And I guess I was just complacent with my mom because she went to work every day. She functioned. You know, you wouldn't know she was a heroin addict unless she told you.
Right. And you said in your book, my dad was my everything. I was willing to sacrifice my integrity, my morals, and my soul to keep him alive. I now realize I had no control over his fate.
Yeah.
That was like freeing to me, as far as we try to control things. How did you relinquish that control in your life? And in your book, you talk like you really had a lot of selling drugs, street life. How did you relinquish that control over your own self?
Actually, I believe it was God, you know, that said, you know, when he sent my grandmother as an angel to tell me that he had a different plan and purpose for my life.
Please unlock your.
Oops, I'm sorry. Trying to turn it down. He showed me that I needed to take a different path and I needed to make different decisions. And it took me a long time, I think through my 20s and 30s, to realize that I was even worthy of living the life that God had planned for me. Now, it took a lot of work. I still had low self-esteem. I had a man in my life, my husband, who was a great support system, but he didn't understand my bouts with depression. He didn't understand why, you know, I didn't feel like I was beautiful or worthy, and why I never felt good enough.
And you talk about in your book too, because you said your father was very attractive, and you're very pretty, and you're light, and you have light eyes, and so many people think, you know, we have these light skinned, dark skinned girl things in high school that like, they always thought that the light skinned girls, it was easy for us. And I went through this, and I had some girls, dark skinned girls, that didn't like me just because I was light skinned. So you said that you wanted to be ugly. Did you feel like your beauty was a curse?
I did because, you know, when I was young, I was in relationships with guys who really treated me like I was a token. I experienced and went through an attempted rape. And, you know, I knew that the guys I dated just wanted to have sex with me, basically, and to use me as like a trophy on their arm.
Right.
And I didn't feel loved, and I was searching for love.
Right.
Sex as that vehicle, thinking that was going to get me love, and it didn't. And so all it did was it ended up, you know, having an effect of low self-esteem. You know, like, what am I doing wrong? And until I met my husband.
Right.
And yeah, I was a very promiscuous teenager, and yeah.
If there's a mother who's listening right now, I want them to just share this with their daughters to understand that, because there's a lot of young women out right now who are sacrificing their body for love because they want to feel something. So you said something just now that I equated sex with love, and it didn't fulfill me, because sex is not love. And there's so many of us growing up, that did that. Like, if I don't give him my body, then he's going to leave, or he's not going to like me. So young girl, mothers who are listening, I want you to please just share these nuggets that Dorinda is giving you, because this is like your life story, from just complete devastation to complete success. And sometimes people see you now and they're like, oh, she's successful, but they don't understand the struggle that came along with that. So mental illness comes in many forms, and you tried to commit suicide twice. So when you get to those moments now in your life, triggers, we call them, whether it's you've been through infidelity or you've been through mental abuse, or we all have triggers in our life. So when you get to those triggers that could push you to a point of, I'm overwhelmed, what do you do now? Because I know you're not going to try to commit suicide anymore, but there was a point in your life where that felt like the ultimate, that's it, You talked about it in your book. I just wanted to go to heaven and be with my dad and my mom. What do you do now when you become overwhelmed?
I pray
Well,
and I give myself affirmations. You know, look how far I've came. Look how much how much I've overcome, how many triumphs I've had. I have the maturity now to know that whatever I'm going through is just a moment in time, right? And so this too shall pass. And so one of the things that drives my husband crazy, he's like, you don't worry about nothing. And I'm like, look, it's a problem today to be gone tomorrow. Like, we'll figure it out.
I'm going to give you 3 words, and I just want you to tell me what comes to mind for you and what do they mean. Family.
Love.
Loyalty.
Is everything.
Whoa. Resilience.
Dorinda.
Whoa. I know that's right. If I could high five you right now, I would. So dysfunction for us for many years was normal. We came from the city, our parents were dysfunctional, and it was just normal for us. How did you shift from thinking that dysfunction wasn't normal anymore?
You know what? I always knew it wasn't normal.
Oh.
I never thought it was normal.
Oh.
I remember being a little girl watching my parents nod and knowing that it wasn't right. So I never thought it was normal. I just thought it was part of life.
Wow. So many and we talked about dysfunction before on your podcast, and so many people are walking around right now dysfunctional and thinking that it's just a part of life, like you said. So when you decided to shift from that lifestyle, because it came a point in time in your life where you said, listen, I got to pull myself together, after your grandmother came to you when you were about to commit suicide and said, you got a purpose. When you decided to shift from that mentality, where did you go next? Because it's not easy, because there's so many people listening like, yeah, she's talking, and where she is right now is, how do you go from I'm selling drugs to going to a job that your grandmother got you and actually functioning there? And usually people will embarrass their grandparent. Why didn't you? Why did your core values check in for you?
My parents were drug addicts, but they were raised by good people. They were good people. My grandparents were middle-class working people. They came from good families, so I knew what right looked like.
Right. That's deep.
I knew that I better not walk in that hospital to embarrass my grandmother. I had enough respect for her never to even try to do something like that. And I was a smart girl. I understood how to hustle. I understood what it took to get ahead. And I understood that if I wanted to be successful in my career, that I needed to know how to play the game. So I wasn't crazy. And just because
you went into the psych ward when you tried to kill yourself. And you kept saying in the book, I'm not crazy. I got to get out of here. I just wanted to go to heaven.
Yeah. When I woke up there and I saw the people that were around me, I'm like, I'm not crazy. Like, what in the heck am I doing up in here? So never did I think I was crazy. I don't think anybody who knew me wouldn't say that I wasn't sharp or smart. And so that's what allowed me to navigate, in my corporate career. Obviously, I made it to the executive ranks, right? And on a GED education. And what I believe, though, is Alfred Edmonds said this to me, and it was so true when he read my book. He said, you're a prime example of life not happening to you, happening for you.
Oh.
Because had you not gone through all of those things, you would not be where you are, right? And the woman you are today. And so that's how I think about it.
Yes.
Right? Those were the things that had to happen so that I could be ready for the challenges that I would face in corporate America. Because let me tell you something. That's a whole nother hustle right there.
Yes. Right. And people try to separate the two, but like you said, it made you strong for anything that came your way. What kept you from going back to that fast money? Because you were living fur coats, like listen, at 17, fur coats and Gucci boots and
Gucci, Fendi, all of it.
I remember that stuff.
Salt and pepper haircut.
I remember all of that stuff that I didn't have. What kept you from going back to that fast money?
Well, you know what? It was funny because when I did get the job in the hospital with my grandmother, I was making $300 a week. I was used to making $3,000 a day. I was like, oh, this is
saying. Like what? $10 an hour.
Yeah, like that's not gonna work. So I still had my hustle on the side, you know, to get me a couple extra $100 every week. And I never forget, I was walking in the projects with my friends, fur coat, Gucci down. We were on our way to Club Sensations in Newark.
Woo!
And the detectives rolled up on us, threw me against the wall, and started searching. And I remember the detective licked my face. It was just a whole.
Oh no!
Yeah, it was a whole.
He's still here right now.
Yeah, he actually retired recently. But anyway, and I remember hearing the voice of God saying, "You're gonna be 18 in 2 weeks. You're either gonna die or go to jail. What's gonna be?"
Whoa!
And that was it. That was my wake up call. So I went to the club that night and partied. Then I called my aunt the next day, who lived in the suburbs of Lake Apatcon. I was like, "Auntie, can you come get me?" And she was the aunt who always believed in me, always said, she called me Dory. Dory, you can be great. You could do anything. You're going to be somebody. And I used to always ignore her, thinking she was crazy.
Right.
But she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So I had to take myself out of the environment and not look back, let go of my so-called friends. Like, I didn't even hesitate. That was it. I just cut them off.
You just knew at that moment when God said, and it's wonderful to know, because I want other people to know that if you get still, you can hear too what your next steps are, because God spoke to you several times through the book. And people sometimes think you crazy when you're saying, "Oh yeah," but you at that moment said, "Uh-oh, let me make this decision." It's like cold turkey, because I mean, $3,000 a day, like, and people wonder why drug dealers end up in jail, because they want more and more and more. But there's a lifestyle that you develop that you don't want to go back to the mediocre, $10 an hour job. And you said your aunt called you Dory, and you had the nickname Duke.
I did. My cousins called me Duke because I was always the one. I was down for a fight, like, because I was such an angry kid.
Right. Right. So you could fight.
I could fight. Well, you know what? My father taught me in jail, because my father boxed. And he told me to protect yourself. You know, he was like, he said, you don't need to be doing all that fighting. Just hit somebody right under the chin as hard as you can and follow up with a hit in the temple. And so I remember I tried it on this girl and I knocked her out cold. And I remember I was like, oh. Like, I thought I killed her. I was like, and then, I started earning a reputation.
Wow. So your book, Protected by Purpose, shook my spirit again last night, because I was going through it. I read the book once and I loved it, because I felt so connected to you as a girl who has her mother. My mom was on crack, and I felt so connected to it. Last night I laughed, I cried, and I learned. Why was it so important for you to share your intimate, personal details? Most people run away from that after they're successful. Like, I'm not telling nobody that. Why was it important for you to share that and those lessons throughout the book?
I held on to the shame of my past for so long. Even as I climbed the ladder in corporate America, I was always, afraid that someone was going to ask me about my upbringing, where I went to college and all that kind of stuff. One day I was at a faith-based conference, and Bishop Cheryl Brown was preaching. I was one of 1,000 people in the room. And when she finished preaching, I went to walk out. And she literally ran off the stage and tapped me on the shoulder. And she said, "Miss, what's your name?" I told her my name. She said, "I hope you weren't embarrassed that I kept staring at you." And I said, "Well, honestly, I didn't notice it, but why?" And she said, "You have an anointing all over you. You're destined to do something great."
Wow.
And I didn't know what to say to that, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I invited her to tea. And at the time, my business partner, who's now my pastor, Dr. DeForest Soares, was with us. And we was talking about our upbringing. And I shared my story with them. And they were like, "You should write a book. You'll bless a lot of people." And I was like, "I don't want to do it." And then one day I was at an event at my employer, and one of my good friends said, "Dorinda, all these women," it was a women's event, "are asking to be introduced to you." And I'm like, "Why don't they just come say hi?"
Right.
He was like, "Dorinda, do you realize you made it? Like, you're that executive that people look up to." And, and it was in that moment that I was like, wait a minute, she's right. Like, I was so busy in the grind, I didn't realize that I had made it. I had done a lot of and accomplished a lot of the things that those young women in that room aspired to. And so that was the impetus for me to say, okay, well, let me share my story, because my mom had passed away at that time. My mom passed away in 2013. And I said, it's time. And then Dr. Soares asked me to come and be the keynote for his women's luncheon at his church. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like, I'm not going to bless those women. You better get a preacher. And he's like, "Girl, if I wanted to preach, I'd get a preacher." He calls me Walker. "Walker, just come on here and do it." And so in my corporate fashion, I done put together a PowerPoint and everything. I sent it to him. He emailed me back. He was like, "Girl, scrap that PowerPoint. You ain't going to have no screen. Just get up there and tell your story."
Right. Oh my goodness.
So I did it. I spoke for a half hour. There were about 200 to 250 women in the room. Literally, Trey, 50 women stood in line and waited up to an hour to speak to me after that.
Wow.
The first woman said to me, "No one knows this, but I've been contemplating suicide for the last couple of days. And I know God sent me here because I needed to hear your story." And she thanked me and hugged me. The second person was like, "Dory, do you remember me?" And I was like, so turns out, good family friend who we call cousin, that kind of closeness.
Yep.
And she was like, "You remember when your cousin bought my mama's car back with all those bullet holes?" And, so we was laughing. That's my cousin in the story that saved my life.
Yes.
Gangster. And then it was story after story. It was a young mom and her daughter. And her daughter was a teenager. And she was saying, "I've been, cutting up and hanging with all the wrong people. And after hearing you speak, I just promised my mom that I would do better."
Wow.
And so that was the affirmation. It was like, okay, you have to write this book, because if this is the reaction to your story, then look how many people you will bless. Wow. And so when I wrote the book, I was overwhelmed by people, because I read your book. I now starting a relationship of healing with my mom, or with, that relative, or, I'm starting to forgive myself. Or I understand addiction a lot better, and what my parents went through. People were surprised that I wasn't angry.
Right. Why? Why weren't you angry? Why aren't you angry? I mean, and we don't blame our parents, because they did the best that they could do. But there's so many of us, and it took me years too I wasn't mad at my mom. I just probably harbored some resentment, because I'm like, I didn't go to college because you didn't know. I wasn't in a sorority because you didn't, all these girls, and so, you know what I'm saying? Because we didn't have those experiences. Why weren't you angry because you weren't angry for a long time. Why weren't you angry at them?
When my dad died, I was angry. I was angry at God. I was angry at everybody. But as I got older, I began to understand, and the healing with my mom, I began to understand that the addiction is a disease, and the choices they made were because of that disease. And I didn't want to hold them accountable. Because I knew they loved me.
Yes.
I knew if they could make a different choice, they would have never used heroin.
Right.
but they couldn't go back.
Mm.
And so why should I be angry? And then when I look at my life, look how much God has given me.
Mm.
And so what am I angry about?
Wow. Addiction is a disease. Everybody that's listening right now that may be going through the turmoil and the devastating effects of addiction, it's so important for them to understand what you just said. Addiction is a disease. People need help. People don't need judgment. Some people are not going to make it through. Some people are going to die addicted. That's just the truth of the matter. But understand that it's an addiction. It's nothing that anybody ever wants. But some people just can't kick the habit. So in your book, you talk about the 3 Ds. So let's start with dysfunction and talk just a little bit about that and why it was important for you to coin the phrase the 3 Ds.
Well, I grew up in a dysfunctional family. It was a loving family, but it was very dysfunctional. And I was dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Made decisions based on the circumstance of my dysfunction, right? And so I wanted to talk about that because I don't know of any family that doesn't have some type of dysfunction. There's some, you could try to sit up there and say that your family is perfect, but I have yet to see it. There's something going on. You might want to keep it. You know how Black folks do, what goes on in his house stays in his house. Well, I'm of the thought, like, let's put it out there. Let's put it out there so we can start to heal as a community.
Right. I love what you just said.
Maybe you can learn from our dysfunction.
I love that you said every family has some level of dysfunction. Just because it's not drug addiction or physical abuse, there's something going on in everybody's house. So every person that's listening that like, oh, I don't want nobody to know this, understand we all got something under the rug in our house. Despair,
that feeling of hopelessness. When I was a child and a teenager, just feeling like there was nothing to look forward to. And I was drowning in that, particularly after my father died and my mom disappeared, feeling like life wasn't worth living. And that's a terrible place to be when you feel like there's nothing to look forward to.
Yes.
And all you feel is despair.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing this with our young people today. They have the highest suicide rate than any other generation. And how do we help them to understand that they have something to look forward to? Because I look back and think about, and when I look at my children, if I was successful and, killing myself at 17, my daughter wouldn't be here, my sons wouldn't be here, and my granddaughter. And look at the life and the family and the legacy that I have now. And so for anyone who's suffering from despair, I wanted them to know there's something on the other side. There's something to look forward to. And that's why I wanted to talk about that.
Wow. And demotivation.
Yeah. So I always knew that I could do great things if I put my mind to it. I knew I was smart. Like school came so easy to me. I didn't have to study. Like I took tests and I passed them. Like I knew that I could be great, but I didn't motivate myself to want to be anything more than what I saw around me.
Woo.
Right. And then I let external outside influences, because the street is something.
Yes, it is.
Tell me that the lifestyle I was living was about the best that I could be. And had it not been for my aunt and my grandparents saying there's more to this, because that life you're leading, there's only 2 places you can go.
Yes.
You're right, in the grave or in jail.
And
I learned that from my cousin, who I admired and adored. And I look at his life now and everything he's lost, right? And I'm just so glad I made a different choice. So
Wow.
I wanted people to understand we all get demotivated,
Right.
but you weren't born not to achieve all that you could be and all that God meant for you to be. Right? God didn't put us on this earth not to want us to achieve great heights.
Wow.
You know, what I learned about life is we are all products of our choices.
Somebody stepped on their
We
toes.
choose to be, mediocre, or we could choose to be great. And that's just the bottom line.
Wow. So, and writing the book and sharing your story, how was that? Did you think, how did you think your husband and your children would receive all this information? Because we don't sit down with our kids and be like, mommy was a drug dealer, and mommy did this, and I was. We usually be like, all right, I don't even want them to know that part of me. How was that process in your mind when you were writing a book that I'm going to share this? And did they read the book, and how did they respond to this?
So my husband didn't know a lot about my child. He knew that I was abused. He knew that my parents were addicts. We were very, in my family, my mother died a heroin addict. So, and we lived in the same house for 16 years. So my mom lived on the third floor. I lived on the second. My grandmother lived on the first. You walk in our house, you're going to smell the weed because my mom smoked weed. So we were very intentional about talking to our kids about drugs. My mom shared, what her addiction cost her.
Right.
And so kids knew. And we talked about it from a medical perspective too, that they were predispositioned if they ever used drugs, that they would be addicts. And so thank God, none of my kids chose to use drugs. They knew I would break their neck anyway. But anyway.
They don't want Duke to come out.
Yeah, so they knew that aspect of my life, but they didn't know about the abuse. They didn't know I was a drug dealer. My husband didn't even know that.
Right.
And so when I wrote the book, it all came out. And my sons didn't want to read the book based on my daughter's reaction to the book. Oh. My daughter was reading the book on her lunch hour at work, called me crying hysterically.
Oh.
And my sons was like, if that's her reaction, we are not reading it. They've seen me speak about it. And I'll never forget my youngest son. He said, Ma, if I ever see that man on the street, he was like, it's a done deal. I'm not asking no questions. Yes.
Devil in disguise. And I want to say this to all my friends from the hood. This book is so relatable. It was like a piece of my life. Dorinda, you are my cousin. I know you my cousin. I got to go back and look. I know you are. I know, because my sister looks just like you. She light skin with the hazel eyes, and my brother. You are my best friend, my sister. And I've unknowingly walked this journey with you. So I want all of anybody from my background who knows me and who has walked through East Orange, particularly to go and get this book, Protected by Purpose, because it will free them to be walking through those streets with you, through those pages. Even last night, I needed it in that moment, the lessons that you have in the book, I needed it. So then you transitioned into corporate America. And I love this because you was the chick with the bag, right? Like, you get a check, you get a check, you get a check for sponsors and things of that nature. Why was it so important for you to help so many Black women's movements?
It's funny, when I was climbing the ladder, I was in this leadership development program. I was doing a rotation in finance. Really didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I knew I had a passion for diversity and inclusion. And I had Thanksgiving dinner, and my grandfather was there with his sister, and they were talking about growing up and having maids and chauffeurs driving them to school. And I was like, what y'all talking about? Y'all lived in Newark. He was like, yeah, we was rich, very flippantly.
Right.
And I was like, what? And then that's when I heard the story that my great grandfather was a millionaire in the city of Newark. He owned property all over the state. And, you know, he was the executive director of the YMCA and had 2 supper clubs, and all the jazz greats frequented. And he had a music school. Sarah Vaughan went to his music school. She asked to be buried next to him. She's buried 2 plots next to him. What? All this history of legacy. And I'm like, what? And so I was like, well, why are we poor? Why are we broke? You know, we was not poor, but broke.
Yeah, but.
And I was like, if that can happen in our family, it's happening in a lot of families. And it can't be a coincidence that I work for one of the largest financial companies in the world. So what can I do about it? And I had this idea that the company, and after, you know, being involved with the business resource groups, and I kept hearing the same thing. The company's not doing enough to you know, market to people who look like us. And so instead of complaining about it, I wrote a proposal, and the proposal was to, you know, educate certain leaders about the power of multicultural marketing and the business opportunity they were missing by not having a dedicated initiative. Never thought it would start into a department being formed and me having my dream job and all of that kind of stuff. But that was another lesson I learned from my mother, because she disappeared after my dad died because she assumed she had AIDS or HIV, because everyone she shared needles with had died except her, right? And so she ended up in this prostitution ring for almost 2 years.
Wow.
You know, really abusing herself or letting herself be abused. And she got diagnosed with cancer in the early 2000s. And the doctor said, we're going to run some tests, and one of them is HIV. And I remember she started crying. And I said, Mom, what's the matter? And she said, Dorinda, I never told you this, but the reason why I started using crack is because I know I have HIV, because everybody I use needles with had it. And so she said, I just don't know why I don't have AIDS. And test came back, she never had it, but she had hepatitis from the prostitution. And that was a wake-up call for me. It was like, I will never put my fear over my faith.
Whoa.
Because if I had just taken a test, her life would have been dramatically different.
Wow.
And so that allowed me to be courageous in America and take risks, you know?
Wow. That piece right there of people being a fear of the unknown turned her from heroin to crack, when all she had to do was sit down and just take a test. And we, like you said, we cannot operate out of fear, because it'll make us make bad decisions. And it's just, that just blew my mind, because we all operate at some level of fear instead of just asking. So you developed a whole department. The girl from the street selling drugs with the Gucci boots.
So what happened was, the COO at the time, so I had an executive sponsor who ended up being my advocate and sponsor. He said, I'm going to, you know, support this initiative. So we worked hand in hand. There was a lot of angst in my corporate job because my direct boss reported to him. Oh. And so here I am working on an initiative with him, with her boss, and she wasn't involved. So it was a lot of lessons learned. And I should write a book about that whole experience, about
now you done put out there.
Politics of corporate America. But it was an interesting time. The COO said, there's so much momentum around this, you know, work on developing the business case to get this department formed. And that's what we did. And even when we did that, they said, well, Dorinda, you're not ready to lead the department. We're going to bring somebody in from the outside. And that person, I thought we were going to be the dream team. I learned a lot from her, but she just couldn't handle it. Because the financial services industry, heavily regulated. It's not like consumer marketing where you can do what you want and be as creative and innovative as you want. You really have to make sure that you're doing the right things and within the regulatory guidelines, so that puts some limits on you as a marketer. And so I was able to excel because I knew the business, I had the relationships, I've worked across the organization. That was a bonus for me. So what I would tell anybody who's working in corporate America is make sure you take as many opportunities to do different things, to learn different skills, but you gotta know P&L. You gotta know top line and bottom line.
Right.
You know, I went to that finance rotation, kicking and screaming, because I'm like, I'm not a numbers girl. But what I learned is those quarterly reports matter. When you're talking with those executives, if you're not talking the language of business, then you're irrelevant.
Right.
And so the one thing that I knew too is that the department should not be in a corporate structure that didn't return any P&L to the business, right? And so being in the business was an asset because we had to report our sales and how we were driving business. And so the last year in my corporate career, there was an organizational change and they moved our department of corporate. And I knew that was the beginning of the end.
Wow.
With corporate, they didn't care about giving back to the business.
Right.
And I'm like, this is never going to work.
Right.
And I was right. It's never going to work.
What gave you, and I know you built, let's talk about building relationships. Like I said, I saw you strategically, not out of wanting to gain anything, but strategically supporting other Black women and other Black women's businesses and diversity that everybody's talking about now. But you was already on that.
Let me tell you, I've been called by so many recruiters about being some D&I.
I know you have.
And the first question I ask is there budget? Is there staff? Am I a member of the C-suite? Do I report to the C-suite?
Ooh, girl.
And what's the alignment to the business? And the answers are all like, they're not ready. And so my thing is, if you want me to come back to corporate America, y'all better be about it, because I'm not coming there just to be the token Black girl in diversity so y'all could say that y'all check the box, because that's not happening.
Woo, y'all better be ready for listen. I got a list for you. Like, wait a minute, let me school you. Let me ask you some questions rather than you asking me. So, and to be in that position of power and to have that freedom in your life is refreshing for me to see from where you came from. Because everybody's like, no, she went to college, she did this, she did that, she had a posh, you could tell, but no, it ain't where you come from. It's where you're going and it's where you're at. So you built relationships. Why was that so important for you to build these relationships with these women? Because I see your tribe.
I understood that if our strategy was going to be effective, that we had to have sustainable relationships in order to drive loyalty to the brand. So I understood the need to have a story about how we help Black businesses grow, because the Black consumer market was one of our key segments. You know, how do we help those segments that we were going after grow? And it's more than just marketing. Right. You know, what kind of community impact that we have, what kind of economic, I mean, I work for a financial services company. And again, thinking about the business, you know, what kind of financial impact that we have, what kind of story do I want the leaders to hear when they're in those board meetings about the impact of our work? And that's what really led to the strategy. Right. And there was some friction around that because, you know, my job was to be an influencer and a external spokesperson for the company. And then I would hear things like, oh, there's more loyalty to her than the brand.
Right.
So then, you know what, as a Black girl, am I getting penalized for doing my job right? And so there was a lot of this friction and, you know.
So what gave you the courage to say, because a check is, listen, a steady check on a Friday or a direct deposit on a Wednesday is everything to a lot of people. What gave you the courage to say, okay,
So I struggled that last year. So it was funny. That last year when they put me in this new department, honestly, I felt like I went 50 years backwards. I remember the first meeting I was in, they pitched to me their idea for what they were going to do for Martin Luther King's, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of his death. And I remember there was hardly any people of color. I was the only Black person in the room. And no, I take that back. It was me and another junior staff member. And I remember them pitching this idea, and it was all kind of crazy for all kind of reasons. And I was, and I was like, why? Why is this happening? Right. And so it just kept getting worse. And, you know, they took away my staff, they took away my budget, and I became the token.
Oh.
I still had the title, I still had the paycheck. But I was like, this is not what I want to do. Like, I want my work to matter. I want to make a difference. And I spiraled into this depression because I struggled in knowing that this wasn't for me, and the rub of, well, what's going to happen if I lose the title, or what's going to be the financial impact if I don't have this paycheck, and oh my God, I don't have my college degree, even though I had took some classes, and what do I do next?
Right.
And I called D. Marshall because I was depressed, like really depressed.
Wow.
And she gave me a book called Fix It Jesus. And she was like, you need to go to therapy. I didn't go to therapy, but I kept praying, reading the scripture from Fix It Jesus. And one day I woke up and I heard the voice of God say, who are you and who do you work for?
Whoa.
And that was it. I was like, ooh, baby, I'm done. And I wrote a letter, like, basically, I'm out. What could we do to negotiate my exit?
Right.
And because you can't do this.
Negotiate my exit. I want the people to understand there's an exit negotiation. You just don't quit your job.
Yeah. And then I did it and never looked back. And it was the best decision, I have to say.
Wow.
Of my life. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for those 20 years and the experience and everything that corporate America poured into me. The company I work for, I would highly recommend that you put your investments there because they're strong and stable. Mine are there, just so you know. But yeah, it was time for me to close that door. And what I realized is I kept trying to push the door open, and God said, girl, that door is closed. I don't know what you're doing.
A brick wall.
Yeah, it's because you need to be walking through this other door.
Right.
And, I'm glad I did it. You know, it's I have my own company now. I'm doing things that I'm passionate about. I'm driving my own creativity. And I just told my husband, I'm not going to say I won't ever go back to corporate America, particularly now. Because prior to everything that was happening with racial injustice, I didn't want to go back.
Right.
But now, when I see, like, I was getting called to speak about race relations and equity, inclusion and stuff, and I'm like, why are people calling me? I don't want to talk about it. I don't have nothing to say. Other than, well, I had stuff to say, but I didn't know if people wanted to hear it.
Right.
Because I wasn't going to tell them what they wanted to hear.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you call me and tell me that your company put out a book, you know, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, gave your employees a book on implicit bias and told them to take a day to reflect, and you wondering why the Black employees is pissed.
Right.
Those was murders. It wasn't implicit bias.
Right.
Right? Let's call it what it is. It was murder. And you need to acknowledge that. You need to acknowledge that there's a race problem in America. That's the biggest pandemic we ever had.
Right.
We've had it for 400 years.
Right. And we still live in it.
So if your company not ready for me to come in there and tell you that, then don't call me.
I know that's right. I know that's right. So I'm looking in your book, right? Because I have a couple of things just highlighted that I just wanted to share with everybody before we end, because we're almost to 10 o'clock, unfortunately. And you know, I got 6,772 questions for you. But in the book, you said, when you allow others to control your emotions, you are allowing them to steal your joy. If you have people in your life who create nothing but noise and chaos, you will never have peace. You have to let them go for your own mental well-being. Last night I just was in the book, like I really was, and I just was like, I'm glad I'm reading. And then chapter 7 is one of my favorite chapters in your book, The Calm Before the Storm. And you just in every chapter you have a letter to the reader, dear reader, and you give them notes. And you talk about judgment, and you talk about so much. This book is so full of meat. Like, there's no bones, it's just all meat. And I just thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for writing this book. I really do, because it has given me the courage to not be embarrassed about where I came from or who I am. It has given me the courage to not be embarrassed that I talk slang. It has given me the courage to be okay with not having a college degree. It has given me the courage to say that my mom smoked crack. And for years, I would say my mom was alcoholic, because she was. And I was okay with that. But to say my mom smoked crack was like, I'm not going to say that. But to be able to say that for somebody else to be released, thank you for releasing me from my fears and my self-doubt and my insecurities and so many other people. So what was the best piece of advice you have ever got? And what is a piece of advice you want to share with the listeners?
The best piece of advice that I've ever had was, it's okay to be vulnerable, right? Because when you're vulnerable, you set yourself free from other people's judgment.
Wow.
Because you're telling your story. And that was important to me, for me to tell the story and for me to own the narrative, because it's my story to tell, it's not yours.
Right.
Best advice I can give to anyone is set standards for who you want to be and how you want to be treated. And don't let people cross those boundaries. And that's what I talked about in the book, about really assessing the relationships in your life. And if they're not bringing you joy and peace and some type of happiness, then you need to let those relationships go. In the workplace, sometimes you can't help but to work with people who may not have your best interests at heart, but you definitely have to set standards for what you will and will not tolerate.
Right.
I wrote that in the book.
You did. You talked about how you stepped to that senior and said, don't do that in a meeting again.
Yeah.
Because if you do, it ain't going to end the same.
Yeah. And he became my advocate, right? Because I had the courage to say, I'm not putting up with this. And I had the courage to tell him what he looked like as a leader.
Right.
He wasn't exhibiting leadership skills in that moment. So you have to have courage for what you will and will not tolerate. And you have to speak up. And I would just say, always try to be your authentic self, right? Because it's such a freeing thing to live in your authenticity. It allows you to be the best person that you can be. And, you know, I remember turning 40 and feeling like it was the best birthday ever. I can't wait to turn 50, by the way, that's next year. But I felt like I had finally like really came into a place in my womanhood where I had found my faith. I was unapologetic about who I was. And then I had released myself from judgment, you know?
Yes.
It's the best thing ever. And so that's what I would say. And I talk a lot about judgment, because it's really, people who judge you, it's really about them. It's not about you.
Right. I told you last night I was up to like 1 a.m. because I'm like, you already read the book, now go to sleep. You got notes and you know, but I still was like, I'm gonna keep reading because I need to read this tonight. And
my favorite story about that book, this woman reached out to me. She said, Ms. Walker, I just want you to know that I turned into a prune because I started reading a book in the tub and I couldn't get out. I couldn't stop reading it.
last night I was like, okay, you're gonna read this and then you're gonna go to sleep. But then I was like, all right, and I read the first line of the next chapter. I was like, I just gotta finish this because it's so good. I'm just saying, it's just for everybody. Listen, please get protected by purpose. This book is like really, it's just really a good, authentic, transparent journey of all of our lives, and we can all see ourselves in you. And maybe everybody's story ain't my mother was a heroine, but we've all gone through some things. So tell everybody right now where they can find you and what's next for you.
I am Dorinda Walker on all social media. My website is dorindawalker.com. You can find me there. Subscribe to my newsletter because I try to put out a weekly newsletter. So subscribe to my database so you can see what's going on. I do a bi-weekly series called Lead 360 Her, which is focused on highlighting powerful Black women in leadership. And people have said it's a masterclass on leadership and life. And so check that out. Follow me to see that, and follow at Lead 360 Her. I do coaching now.
Yes.
Executive training and coaching, and life transformation coaching. I just wrapped up a masterclass that I can't wait to showcase. It was really, really good. And so I'm just doing a whole bunch of stuff. I have a campaign called Cries Conquered that we did a soft launch on. CRY stands for culture, racism, inequity, equality, and sexism. And it's all about conquering the issues in the cries that are causing high rates of anxiety, suicide, and depression among Gen Z. So follow CRY as well.
Wow. And of course, I always, during these times, I've decided that I want to give out the suicide hotline because there's so much mental illness going on, so much depression. We're all just dealing with a lot right now with COVID, on top of the racial things that are going on in our country, on top of a president that's just stuff that you just watch and you can't believe, like, we really here, on top of our regular everyday life things that we were already going through, and then being isolated and self-distancing and don't hug people. This is not natural for us. I mean, I can speak for us as Black people. This is not natural for us. We see each other, cook out, we hug, whatever. So the suicide hotline is 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-8255. If you are feeling depressed and you need some help, nobody will know that you called, and it's okay because every one of us needs help, each and every one of us. So Dorinda, I thank you for your time, and I thank you for all of those golden nuggets from where you came from to where you're at. And I hope that everybody will go out and buy the book, Protected by Purpose, because we are all here, as D. Marshall would say, on purpose, for a purpose, and we should all be walking in our purpose. And if you are authentically walking in your purpose, like Dorinda said, you will find joy and happiness. You will feel good. You won't feel anxious or fear. Remember what I tell you at the end of all my broadcasts, you deserve the best. Yes, I'm talking to you. You deserve the best. Now go get it. Peace and blessings. And remember Psalm 147:3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds.